The first clue something was off came when my power bill tripled in 1 month. I'm Roman Ellers, a 39-year-old electrician who just wanted peace and quiet after a long day of crawling through attics and rewiring old breaker boxes. I live in a modest one-story home in Maple Ridge, a neighborhood run by the most power-hungry HOA this side of the state line. Their president? Regina Catley. A bleach-blonde tyrant with a clipboard glued to her hand and a voice that could peel paint off drywall. She's the type who thinks planting the wrong color flowers is a felony offense. 3 weeks ago, I opened my electric bill and nearly choked on my coffee $5,000. I stared at it like it was a practical joke. I hadn't done anything different. No new appliances. No Christmas lights in July. Just the same old circuits and a kid who barely used his PS5. What in the hell is this? I muttered, pacing. I called the power company. They checked the meter, said it was accurate. I didn't buy it, so I went outside and checked the meter myself, except it wasn't just running. It was screaming. Something was drawing massive amounts of power, so I followed the line, and what do I find? A buried cable running from my meter across the greenbelt and into the HOA's community clubhouse. The same clubhouse that had recently been renovated with AC upgrades, a heated pool, and security lighting bright enough to land a plane. I stormed into the next HOA meeting, bill in hand. The room was half filled with retirees sipping lemonade and pretending they weren't bored out of their minds. Regina sat at the head of the table wearing a salmon-colored pantsuit like she was running for Senate. "Regina," I said, holding up the bill. "You want to explain why my power meter is hooked up to the clubhouse?" She blinked at me like I'd just spoken Martian. "Roman, please, we had a licensed contractor install those systems. If there was a mistake, it wasn't intentional." "Right," I said. "So you accidentally wired the clubhouse to my house and accidentally ran it for 2 months without telling me." "Let's not get dramatic," she said, waving her hand. "We'll look into it and get back to you." "No, you'll fix it now." "And you're going to reimburse me?" She leaned forward, narrowing her eyes. "Are you accusing your HOA board of theft?" "I'm accusing you of being a parasite, Regina." The room went quiet. Someone coughed. She stood up, lips pursed. "You're out of order, Mr. Ellers. You'll receive a formal response in writing. Until then, I suggest you stop disrupting our meeting." I walked out before I said something I'd regret, but I wasn't done, not even close. I spent the next few days installing cameras around the meter and tracing every inch of the cable. I documented everything. Footage of the wiring, the line running underground, even the stamped permit Regina signed off on claiming the power was sourced from the city grid. It wasn't. It was me, $5,000 stolen, and they were acting like I was the problem. That's when I decided if they wanted to play dirty, I'd play electrical. And Regina. She was about to learn what it meant to mess with a man who knew the grid better than his own kitchen. By Thursday night, I'd mapped the entire setup. The cable from my power box tunneled under the fence line, through the green belt, and into a disguised junction hidden under a fake irrigation box. From there, it split into multiple conduits that powered the clubhouse's HVAC, lighting, and even the outdoor speakers they used for community yoga. I took high-resolution photos and time-stamped video from the motion-triggered cameras I'd installed near the box. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate, and whoever ran that line knew exactly what they were doing. The cable was buried deep enough to avoid casual discovery, and the junctions were weatherproofed and labeled with fake city inspection tags. Someone went to a lot of trouble to make it look legitimate. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was insulted. Friday morning, I took everything to my friend Samira, a property lawyer who owed me a favor after I rewired her bakery without charging a dime. She flipped through the photos and raised an eyebrow. "That's criminal misappropriation," she said. "If this was a private company, it'd be wire fraud and utility theft." "Can we make it stick?" she nodded. "You've got enough here to start a fire. But if you want it to burn, we need to go public." I wasn't sure I wanted to be the face of a neighborhood rebellion, but I wasn't about to let it slide either. That afternoon, I filed a police report and submitted my documentation to the city inspector's office. They didn't say much, but the way the clerk's eyes widened when she saw the permit number told me they hadn't issued it. That night, I waited. The clubhouse was hosting one of Regina's infamous quarterly planning forums, which was code for a catered wine party disguised as a budget meeting. The place was lit up like a casino, and I could hear the hum of industrial air conditioning units from 3 houses away at exactly 8:13 p.m. I opened my breaker panel and flipped the master disconnect labeled aux feed junction X42. The entire clubhouse went dark. The music cut out mid-note. The lights blinked off one by one. The wine chillers, the patio heaters, the landscape uplighting all dead. A few seconds later, I heard the first shriek from across the green belt. I walked back inside, poured a glass of water, and waited. 15 minutes later, someone pounded on my front door like they were trying to break it down. I opened it to find Regina standing there in sequined heels and a silk blouse, hair frizzing slightly from the humid night air. "What did you do?" she hissed. "Come again, don't play dumb," she snapped. "The clubhouse lost power right after you left that little love note in the HOA mailbox." "I didn't leave a note, I left an invoice," she froze. "For $5,247.39, I said. "With a late fee. That's extortion." "No, Regina, what's extortion is stealing power from someone else's meter and lying to the entire community about it." She tried to push past me, but I blocked the doorway. "You're trespassing now, I'd step back. Do you have any idea what you've just done? You shut down a city-maintained facility. That's a crime," I laughed. "City-maintained? You mean the clubhouse you falsely claimed was connected to the municipal grid in the permit application you forged?" Her jaw locked. She didn't answer. "I've already reported the theft and the falsified permits to the city and the police," I said. "By Monday morning, you'll be lucky if you're not facing charges, and you might want to let your contractor know too he signed off on the inspection logs." For a second, her composure cracked. Just a flicker. Then came the fury. "You're going to regret this." "That's funny," I said, "because I'm already feeling better." She turned and stormed off, heels clicking like gunshots on the sidewalk. By Saturday, the neighborhood was buzzing. Word spread fast once residents realized the clubhouse was offline. The board tried to blame it on a transformer failure, but one of the teens who hung out on the basketball court posted footage of the exact moment the lights cut, and the timestamp matched perfectly with my camera footage. People started asking questions. Loud ones. Sunday morning, Regina sent out an emergency email claiming that, due to malicious interference from a disgruntled homeowner, the clubhouse would be closed until further notice. That only made things worse. By evening, I had 3 neighbors on my porch with questions and a tray of homemade cookies. I told them everything. When I showed them the wiring photos and the forged permit, they were livid. 2 of them had served on the board years ago and knew the procedure inside and out. One of them, Mark, was a retired electrical engineer who immediately spotted the deception in the junction setup. "We need to call a community meeting," he said. "Without the board." So we did. Monday night, we met in the park across the street from the darkened clubhouse. Nearly 30 people showed up. Retirees, young couples, parents. Even the guy who always wore headphones and never waved. I laid out the evidence, every document, every video, every dollar. Someone brought a projector and screen, and we showed the footage of the buried line and the forged tags. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Then Samira stepped forward with a printed copy of the city's official response. "The permit listed on the clubhouse upgrade was never issued," she said. "In fact, the number belongs to a completely different address in another city." "That's felony-level forgery," Mark added, "and tapping into a private meter without consent, that's utility theft. The board's liable, especially since it was signed by the HOA president." The room was dead silent. Then the yelling started. People wanted answers. Some demanded Regina step down immediately. Others wanted to sue the board collectively. A few called for a full audit of all HOA expenditures going back 5 years. I just sat back and let it unravel. I didn't need to lead the charge. I'd lit the fuse. The neighborhood would do the rest. By Wednesday, the police had returned with a warrant. They pulled several documents from the HOA office, including the original permit application and checks signed by Regina that matched the contractor's invoices. Thursday morning, she resigned. No press release. No apology. Just a terse email about personal matters and transition of leadership. But it wasn't over yet. With Samira's help, we filed a civil claim to recover the power costs, plus damages. Several neighbors joined the suit, citing misappropriated dues and unauthorized spending. The contractor who installed the wiring cut a deal with the city, turning over emails and signed orders that implicated multiple board members. The clubhouse remained offline for 2 more weeks. When it finally reopened, it was under the supervision of a newly elected board, one that included Mark, a school teacher named Lacey, and, to my surprise, myself. I didn't want the job, but someone said, "You're the only one who actually did something." Fair enough. The first motion we passed. Mandatory quarterly audits, all financials made public, and a requirement that any future construction be verified by an independent city official. Regina moved out 2 months later. Her house sold below market value. No one threw her a going-away party. Our first official board meeting under the new leadership wasn't held in the clubhouse. We chose the public library's community room instead, where the lights didn't rely on stolen power and the thermostat didn't come with a criminal record. There was no ceremonial ribbon cutting or speeches. Just a worn folding table, 3 mismatched chairs, and a stack of folders that hadn't seen daylight since at least the previous administration. Lacey, the schoolteacher, brought her laptop. Mark, the retired engineer, brought a calculator older than most of the residents. I brought coffee and a notepad labeled Accountability. We opened the meeting by reviewing the HOA's archived spending records. That's when things got truly ugly. "Tell me I'm reading this wrong," Lacey said, pushing a spreadsheet toward me. "It says we spent over $20,000 on landscaping evaluations last year, but there's no receipt, no contractor listed, just a check number and Regina's signature." I skimmed the line item. That's not even the worst of it. "Look at this one: security consulting, $8,000, paid to an LLC that doesn't even have a website." I ran the address. It's a mailbox inside a UPS store. Mark adjusted his glasses without looking up. "They were laundering funds through shell businesses. This isn't just mismanagement. This is coordinated theft." Lacey tapped the table. "We need a forensic accountant. Yesterday." By the end of the meeting, we had flagged over $90,000 in questionable expenses spanning the last 3 years, security upgrades that were never installed. Pest control contracts double-billed within the same month. And most disturbing, several payments labeled as legal retainer, all made to a firm that had no record of ever representing the HOA in any case or filing. I made a call that evening to the city's fraud division. They sent 2 investigators, both wearing plain clothes, who showed up at my house the next morning with travel mugs and a list of questions. "Mr. Ellers," the taller one said, flipping open his notebook, "we've reviewed the original wire fraud complaint. The forged permit alone could land someone in serious trouble, but what you've uncovered since, that's a different beast." The other one, a woman with cropped hair and a voice like gravel, added, "You have any idea how common HOA embezzlement is? Most people never look close enough to find it." "Well," I said, "they stole from the wrong electrician." They stayed for 2 hours, making copies and cataloging every flagged transaction the new board had uncovered. Before they left, they gave me a direct number to reach them and a warning. "If any of the previous board members start making noise, let us know. Desperate people do stupid things." I didn't have to wait long. That Saturday, I came home from a job to find my mailbox ripped off its post and a dead possum stuffed through my screen door. Not subtle. The police took a report, but there were no cameras nearby. I installed one the next morning with a sign below it that said "Smile for the DA." Then came the anonymous letters, typed, no return address, each one more absurd than the last. One accused me of sabotaging community resources. Another claimed I had hacked the power grid for personal revenge. The third was just a single sentence. Electricians can have accidents too. Lacey got one shoved under her windshield wiper while shopping. Mark's dog found one wrapped around a raw steak tossed into his yard. We reported everything. The investigators opened a harassment file. Samira, who had now become our unofficial legal guide, advised us to keep documenting every incident. She also passed along a contact at the state attorney general's office. By the time the forensic accountant finished her audit, the number had ballooned. $183,000. That's how much Regina and her board had siphoned from HOA dues over 4 years. The landscaper. A cousin. The security consultant. Her nephew, who ran a tech blog from his basement. The legal retainer. A company she registered herself under a false name. The AG's office didn't hesitate. Within days, subpoenas were issued. Regina was picked up at her new job office manager at a dental clinic by 2 officers in plain view of waiting patients. Her vice president, a man named Dalton who had once fined a neighbor for a non-regulation garden gnome, was arrested at a golf course. The news broke the following morning. Local outlets ran with it. HOA president accused of massive fraud, the headlines read. There was a photo of Regina in handcuffs, her face twisted somewhere between disbelief and rage. The story detailed the misused funds, the forged permits, and even mentioned the stolen electricity. I went to the hardware store that afternoon to pick up a new breaker panel cover. As I stood in line, a guy in a blue flannel leaned over and whispered, "You're the guy who shut him down, right?" I nodded. About time someone did. Back in Maple Ridge, the mood had shifted. People who used to avoid eye contact now waved. Neighbors who had never spoken to one another met at the park to swap stories. Someone started a community website to post updates and track HOA decisions. Transparency, it seemed, had become contagious. Still, not everyone was happy. There were holdouts residents who had benefited under the old regime or simply didn't like change. One woman, Cheryl, who had served as decorative aesthetics chair, accused us of ruining the neighborhood's character. She tried to rally support against the new board, but found little traction once the audit results went public. At our second meeting, this time held in the cleaned-up clubhouse under freshly verified municipal power, Lacey proposed a new rule. All board decisions would be recorded and posted online. No more closed-door sessions. No more mystery invoices. It passed unanimously. We also voted to install solar panels on the clubhouse roof, partly to reduce costs, partly as a symbolic middle finger to the legacy of stolen electricity. Mark volunteered to oversee the project, and I offered to handle the wiring personally. We paid for it with the recovered funds. Regina's trial began 6 months later. She faced multiple felony charges: wire fraud, theft by deception, forgery, and conspiracy to defraud. Her defense tried to paint her as overwhelmed, out of her depth, a woman who had simply made misguided choices while trying to beautify the community. The jury didn't buy it. She was convicted on all counts. The judge, after reviewing the evidence and hearing from over a dozen residents, sentenced her to 8 years, with the possibility of parole after 5. Dalton took a plea deal and agreed to testify in exchange for 2 years probation and full restitution. When the sentence was read, a few of us were in the courtroom, not out of spite, just to make sure it was real, that it was over. Outside, Lacey turned to me. "Think she ever thought it would end like this?" I shook my head. "She probably thought no one would ever check the wiring," we laughed. Not out of joy, but relief. Maple Ridge wasn't perfect now, but it was ours again. And this time, the lights were on for all the right reasons. The solar contractor shook my hand with one of those heavy, calloused grips that said he knew his way around a roof. He and his crew were finishing the last of the panels, and the inverter system was already humming quietly in the corner of the clubhouse utility room. "All set," he said, wiping his forehead with his sleeve. "You've got a clean install, and the energy offset should cover most of your monthly usage plus some." "Appreciate it," I said, glancing around. "Never thought I'd see this building running legally." He chuckled and rolled up the blueprints. "You'd be surprised how many HOAs cut corners." "Most don't get caught. Yours must have ticked off the wrong guy." I locked up behind him and stood in the quiet for a moment. The air wasn't buzzing with overworked compressors anymore. The lights weren't flickering from overloaded circuits. The building finally sounded like what it was supposed to be. A community hub, not a crime scene. Outside, kids were riding bikes again. A few neighbors lingered on porches, chatting like they used to before the board turned everything into a surveillance state. The tension that had wrapped itself around the neighborhood like barbed wire had started to loosen. But one last thread still needed cutting. The forensic accountant's final report had included a footnote, one that hadn't made headlines, and one we hadn't shared publicly yet. It was a single payment, buried in a quarterly expense report from nearly 2 years ago. $6,000 labeled only as expedited compliance services. No invoice, no vendor, no explanation. When I showed it to Samira, she narrowed her eyes. "This isn't just vague," she said. "It's deliberately vague. That's not how you hide a landscaping bill, that's how you hide a payoff." We dug in. Mark reached out to a former board member who'd resigned quietly 8 months before the fallout. Her name was Evelyn, and she'd moved 2 towns over. When I called her, she hesitated before answering. "You have no idea what they were doing," she said. "I left before I became complicit." "What does expedited compliance mean?" I asked. There was a long pause. "They paid off a city inspector for the electrical permits." I didn't see the money change hands, but I saw the emails. Regina had a contact, someone she called Tanner, who signed off on the paperwork without ever visiting the site. Samira reached out to the city's internal affairs unit. They launched a quiet investigation while we kept things under wraps. 3 weeks later, they found him. Tanner Willis, a junior inspector who'd started barely a year before the permit was issued. No prior record, no red flags. But his name was on the forged documentation, and his login credentials had been used to approve 3 separate permits tied to the clubhouse. He was arrested at his apartment without incident. The city filed charges for bribery, falsifying public records, and conspiracy to commit fraud. He confessed within 2 days, naming Regina and 2 other board members as the ones who looped him in. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he agreed to testify in the civil case we'd filed against the former board. The trial was scheduled for early spring. Leading up to it, we kept our heads down. No interviews, no public statements. We kept working on the neighborhood, repainting the park benches, organizing weekend cleanups, even hosting a community barbecue in the clubhouse courtyard, the first in over 5 years. At the barbecue, I noticed a woman I didn't recognize standing a little apart from the crowd. She wore a navy windbreaker and kept scanning the area with a subtle confidence that stood out. When I approached, she extended a hand. "Detective Clara Reyes," she said. "I'm with the district attorney's office. I've been assigned as liaison for the upcoming trial." I offered her a bottle of water from the cooler. "Didn't expect a visit tonight." "I wanted to see the neighborhood for myself," she said. "Get a sense of what's at stake. Cases like this don't happen often. Most HOAs that steal this kind of money do it quietly, with just enough plausible deniability to skate past consequences. Not this one." "No," she agreed. "Not this one." In court, Regina wore a gray pantsuit instead of her usual pastel flair. Her lawyer tried to paint her as overwhelmed, misled, just another volunteer in over her head. But the evidence was clear. Emails, bank transfers, the testimony from Tanner. And the most damning of all, a voice memo she'd accidentally recorded on her phone during a board meeting, where she instructed Dalton to keep it quiet and make sure the electrician doesn't figure it out. She winced when the audio played. The jury took less than 6 hours. She was sentenced to 12 years in state prison, with no eligibility for parole until year 8. Dalton received 5 years. The third board member took a plea deal and was barred from serving on any residential board again for life. The city launched a full audit of all HOAs within its jurisdiction. Compliance officers were reassigned. New oversight committees were formed. Tanner lost his license permanently and was ordered to repay every dollar he accepted under the table. Back in Maple Ridge, we held a final vote on a resolution we'd been drafting since the trial began. Every board member going forward would be limited to 2 terms. All financial decisions over $3,000 would require a community vote. And all power systems, HVAC, and infrastructure upgrades would require dual inspection, one from the city, one from a licensed third party selected by residents. It passed with a unanimous show of hands. After the vote, Lacey turned to me while folding up the chairs. "You ever think you'd end up running a neighborhood?" "Not once," I said, tossing a stack of papers into a bin. "But I've wired enough buildings to know this. If you don't check the foundation now and then, things rot beneath your feet," she nodded. "Still, it's a hell of a thing. Exposing corruption, rebuilding trust. You should be proud." "I'm just glad the lights are on for the right reasons now," I said. "And no one's stealing power to keep them that way." That night, I walked the block with a mug of tea, watching porch lights flicker on one by one like a slow ripple of calm. A few folks waved from their steps. One kid zipped past on a scooter, nearly clipping my knee. The air was warmer than it should have been for the season, but it felt clean. No hum from buried cables. No whisper of hidden junctions. Just a neighborhood stitched back together by the same people who once thought they had no say at all. The clubhouse stood quiet behind me, solar panels gleaming faintly in the moonlight. For the first time in years, it wasn't a monument to control or deception. It was just a building, and that was enough.